Morning, everybody. I'm going to have to remind myself to stay still because I am a mover when I speak, and you will not hear me if I move. So I'm going to stand quite still. But thank you so much, Angela, for the opportunity to have me here this morning. Can everybody at the back hear me? Okay, great. Um, and it is just so lovely to be here with everybody. I really do count it a privilege to be in a room with people who have walked various journeys in their lives, and I definitely do not think that I know it all, but I just know a little bit from my own life journey and from what I've spent the last few years studying. But I really do just count it a great privilege to just share space with all of you this morning, and on this very, very cold Saturday. I was sitting at the back with my toes literally numb. So if you start fidgeting, it's okay. I understand how cold it is. So you're probably going to find that there, initially in what I'm sharing, there's a little bit of overlap with what Paula was sharing this morning, but I just felt that I couldn't just dive straight into relational wellness. I wanted to paint a picture for you of a little bit about stress, and I guess I'll color in a little bit more of what Paula's already started this morning. And then we'll go into looking at how does stress affect our nervous system, and then how does that affect our ability to relate to one another. And very often when we are stressed, that our relationships do become quite conflictual because we just have much less capacity. So I just wanted to, so I hope that you can see bits of the slides from the back. So basically, I wanted to start by looking at some statistics, and I was quite shocked by what I found. And the most recent stats are showing that South Africans' stress levels have increased by 56% post-COVID. And I think we live in a post-COVID world. And so there has been a massive increase in the amount of stress that we are dealing with now post-COVID. And you'll find, so words like quiet quitting, long haul COVID, and languishing were words that didn't exist really pre-COVID. So your quiet quitting, that's a phenomenon where basically it's where I'll give the bare minimum at work. I can't resign, or I don't want to really resign, I need the income, so I'm not going to quit, but I'm actually just going to give the bare minimum. So I'm quietly quitting because my reserves are done. And then terms like long haul COVID, and I know my friend Karen deals a lot with long haul COVID patients, and the symptoms of that, where some of us are sitting with long-term side effects of having had COVID. And then the last term is one that was coined during COVID, and that's what we call languishing. Languishing is basically where it's that kind of nyeh feeling. I often say to my adolescents in therapy, are you just feeling nyeh, like blah? And they're like, yeah, that's how I feel. And it's a listlessness, it's an apathy. It's not what we would classify as a major depression, but it's just this is just all too much. So maybe there's some of those terms that you can relate to. I certainly can. And I know coming out of COVID, I was definitely in a languishing state where I just didn't have capacity for things I used to have capacity for. Now, just a funny story. I've got a 4.5-year-old daughter, and I said to her name is Zoe, I said to her, Zoe, do you know what stress means? So she was like, what? So she says, well, Mom, stress rhymes with dress. So I said, yes, that's right. And she said, and I think it's when you feel really mad. And I thought, well, she's not far wrong, because you do get mad, you get angry, and you feel pretty mad in your head. So that was just quite sweet. But so some of you may have heard of Brené Brown. I really enjoy a lot of her work. She's a social worker and a researcher. And she's got a very nice definition of stress. And basically she says, stress is where environmental demand exceeds our ability to cope successfully. So I'm going to explain with quite a nice analogy shortly, but basically stress is, we would look at it as too much information, too much demand coming into the nervous system at one time. So it exceeds our ability to cope successfully. And as Paula said, some stress is good. I mean, we need a bit of vummer when we're going to maybe write a test, or we, like right now, you know, my adrenal gland is sort of pumping a bit because otherwise I might be quite boring. So a little bit of stress is necessary, but it's when it exceeds our ability to cope. So I really like that definition. So now for quite a nice analogy. So I love this analogy. I tell it to a lot of my clients because I just find it makes so much sense. So if you picture your life, or think of your life as a highway, okay? So those are lanes on your highway. And now your kind of normal ebb and flow life stresses, but are like cars on the highway on a Sunday afternoon, or you're driving on the highway on a Sunday afternoon. There's space on the highway, you're vigilant because you're driving, but you can change lanes, there's no accidents, and you're managing, okay? Then what happens is stress builds, and there's more cars that move onto the highway, okay? Now it's maybe like a Friday afternoon, okay? And it's bumper to bumper, and you want to get home, or maybe you're late for something, and now that stress starts to build, okay? But you kind of coping, but it's your highway is getting full. Then the stress continues, okay? And so more and more cars come onto your highway, and it's getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And bearing in mind, we have an on-ramp. So every day of our lives, information is coming into your nervous system. And my understanding of the nervous system, I mean, I get it from my studies, but I like to make things practical. So basically your nervous system is a very complex system of nerves, including your brain and your spinal cord, and a whole host of nerve networks that are communicating brain and body all the time. And so, okay, so our stress is building, and this could be, it's anything that your nervous system perceives as threatening, and anything that your nervous system perceives as too much. So no one could ever say to you, oh no, that's not stressful, because for you, that's stressful. And then this is what we eventually end up with. So our life highway just becomes absolutely chaotic. We've got bumper bashings, we've got head-on collisions, we've got cars on their heads, we've got petrol running out onto the highway. How many of you can relate to this? Yeah, so, and I talk with a huge amount of empathy because, you know, being a mental health professional, you have this very false idea that you should have it all together. And I can promise you I don't have it all together. I think that's why I went into the profession, because my highway looked totally chaotic, and it has many times in my life. So this has just been such a wonderful analogy that I have learnt about through a very good friend and colleague of mine who's a clinical psychologist. She developed this analogy, and I just kind of put the image to it. And so we've got this very flooded nervous system. So this is often what stress looks like. Now, something that is very helpful is to think to yourself, okay, to be able to separate the stress from the stressor. So, for example, a stressor might be your job, let's say. But it might not be an option for you to get out of that, okay? So then you've got to look at it and go, okay, well then how do I manage the physiological stress? So the stressor is the environmental demand, a difficult relationship, a divorce, a work situation, whatever it might be. Stress is the physiological impact. Anxiety, insomnia, eating too little, eating too much, not being able to get out of bed, etc. Physical ailments, where there's a lot of research now on the gut being your second brain, and how much stress we hold in our gut, which is quite interesting. But so something I've recently learnt about, and I know, apologies for how small that text is, but sorry, I'm going to go back here and then I'll get there. So something I've recently learnt about that's been so helpful is, in order to cope with stresses that are not going away anytime soon, I have to find ways of completing the stress cycle. Because when I don't complete the stress cycle, there's build-ups of stress cycle, and this is when we end up here. Because we cope, we bear impact, and eventually our body just goes, okay, thanks, I'm done. And so how do we complete a stress cycle? It can be something very simple. So there's a very good book by two sisters. Their names are Amelia and Emily Nagoski, and they wrote a book called Burnout. And this is their theory around separating the stress from the stressor, and then completing the stress cycle. And they give an example of like someone who lives overseas, and maybe they've got very long train commutes to and from work, and they find it very stressful. They come home, their nervous system is saturated, and that's when you walk in and you have nothing left. And your child does something, or your husband says something, or your dog's destroyed something, and you just lose it because you've got nothing left. It's not because you're a horrible person, it's because you're human and your highway is full. So the example they give is that this person came home after a very long commute and did 10 jumping jacks. And that was enough to signal to their nervous system that they were safe. Because basically what happens, and Paula touched on this as well, is that stress, we perceive it as a threat. So it can be a very direct threat, or it can be perceived threat. And when we perceive threat, our nervous system goes into, I need to keep this person alive. And so generally we will go into fight, then we'll go into flight. Other way around. Flight, I need to get the heck out of here. If your brain goes, there's no ways you're getting out of here, then I'm going to fight. And very often anxiety presents itself as anger. We don't always understand that, but a very aggressive tendency can actually, what underlies anger, because we look at anger as a secondary emotion. So we say there's something underlying that. Very often it's anxiety, but I'm in fight mode, so I'm gonna, don't talk to me like that, or you just, because often we manage it at work. So we'll manage a smile to a coworker, or we're in a meeting and we're with a client and I'll get onto that as soon as possible. And then you get home and you're done. There's no more fake smiles, there's no more responses like, I'll get that done for you as soon as possible. My husband says something and I'm like, what are you saying, And he just said to me yesterday, he said, you're so aggressive. I was like, I'm not, And here I am talking about this. I'm like, sort of rich coming from me. But anyway, so that is basically just where, so you are, you're done. You've managed the nice responses at work and you're now done. So other ways of completing the stress cycle that are very practical. It can be, and this is research based, it can be a good cry. And I know we often shy away from crying. I do it as well. And it's sort of, oh, so sorry, I'm crying, oh, so sorry. But if I was laughing, it would be much more socially acceptable, even if I was maybe angry. But to cry, oh, shame, you're crying, you're so sensitive. No, I'm actually just, my body needs to release something. And so when we cry, the focus here is not actually on ruminating on what is making me cry. It's on the biological mechanism of the cry. I'm crying, there's tears rolling down my cheeks, I need a tissue. I just need to work through the cycle because emotions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'm in the middle of it right now. So a good cry, a deep pressure hug from a safe person. So it's not just the church, when I was at youth and we weren't allowed to sort of hug, it was, it's not that. It's a deep pressure, but with a safe person. It's that deep pressure. If you're not a hugger and you think, oh no, then get yourself something like a weighted beanbag or a lap pad or a weighted blanket. My daughter had some sensory things as a baby, and we got her a weighted blanket. And it was such a good thing that signaled to her little nervous system that she was safe. So if you're someone who needs that, do that. Or wrap yourself in your duvet if you need to. Something that I've recently started, which might sound crazy, I actually thought my husband was truly losing his marbles, but is something called cold water immersion. I don't know if any of you have you read the latest research. It is fantastic. There is such good research coming out, and my husband was doing it for a few weeks, and I thought, no, there is no ways I'm doing this. And then I thought, you know what? I felt so. The one morning, I think my daughter because she's 4.5, she is asserting her independence like no one's business. She dressed herself with her clothes backwards, and as one does, I mean, why not? And she, I think every step of the routine was a fight. Teeth, hair, everything. And I then was so done, and then I had a full day of clients, and you've got to, you sit there and you, so what space do I find you in? And I'm like, I want to say, well, the space you find me in. And so I have to be very, very intentional about this stuff in order to do my job well. So cold water immersion, if you're interested in it or you think it's crazy, go and look it up. So I have been doing this in my swimming pool for 4 minutes 3 times a week. So that's the recommended, so 12 minutes a week. And there's such a thing called thermogenesis that kicks in, so I've learned, and it's your internal heating mechanism that kicks in, and you really, after about a minute, don't feel the cold. If that you think this lady is absolutely off her rocker, that's fine. There's lots of other things you can do. Time in nature, just having a nice walk, sitting in your rose garden with a cup of tea is great. A good laugh with a friend, phone that friend or organize a coffee with that friend who makes you laugh. And then any kind of body movement. You don't have to be a major runner or anything like that. It's any kind of body movement. You can lie on your floor for 5 minutes and do some stretches, and that can be enough to signal to your nervous system that you're safe. Because basically what you're doing, you are completing the cycle, because you have a stressful day at work, too much information coming in at one time, your highway is already full, you come home and there's an unfinished cycle, and that's when we blow. And when we blow, our relationships over time start to take strain. Okay, so those were just various ways. Another one is engaging in any sort of creative expression. You don't have to be an artist at all, but anything that for you, whether it's baking, cooking, anything that's creative for you. And all right, so now how are we doing? Okay, we still got half an hour. So having been a teacher first, I very much believe in the value of concrete apparatus. So I have arrived with a few concrete apparatus, and I also believe in volunteers and in experiential learning. So if you're looking at the floor, I might just ask you to come up. No, I'm joking. I was never that teacher. So now let's get into, so how do we maintain relational wellness during times of stress? There are so many ways, and when I was preparing for today, I started very broad and I thought I'm going to totally overwhelm everybody. So I've whittled it down to 5. This is definitely not these are not the only 5 ways, but these are ways that I have found helpful in my own relationships and then in the work that I do in my practice. So the first point that I'd like to leave you with is, in psychology, we call it unconditional positive regard, which is something that the psychologist Carl Rogers, he coined this term many, many years ago. But as Paula said, the biblical truth came first, and so it marries exactly with the biblical principle of unconditional love and what God calls us to in terms of loving without condition. And unconditional love says that I accept you, an unconditional positive regard, I accept you just for who you are. I don't approve of you. And if you think about it, it's a very good distinction to make between acceptance and approval. So acceptance says, you know what, I just accept you because you exist. And I love you because you exist. Whether you do this or you don't do this, or you give me this or you don't give me this, doesn't matter. And I love the psychological definition of unconditional positive regard is the warm acceptance of every aspect of people's experience without any preconditions for acceptance. And so, firstly, I want to encourage you to look toward yourself with unconditional positive regard, especially when you're going through stressful times and your highway is full. Because very often our self-narrative can be very harsh. It's, you should be doing better. You should be sowing into these relationships more. You're not coping like you used to cope. You're not holding down as many responsibilities as you used to. And we berate ourselves very often for not coping as we think we should, because we approve of ourselves rather than fundamentally accept ourselves. So this is my very big mirror. I ordered it off Takealot and it was so huge when it arrived. It looked like a little handheld mirror and it arrived as this massive thing. I thought, there's no ways I can put this in my handbag, but sort of pull it out like, but it's come in handy. So when you think of unconditional positive regard, think of this mirror. And when you look at yourself, what is the narrative you're telling yourself about your stress? And then, in terms of relational wellness, when you look at your partner or your friend or your child or whatever, and you see their face in this mirror, what is the narrative that you have towards them for the space that they are in? Are we in a space where we're saying, you know what, I accept you as you are? And let's be honest, I might not like the stressed version of you, but I can still accept you for who you are, stress and all. So that's the first step, if you will, to, not that this works in nice, neat steps, but let's just call it a step, is unconditional positive regard. Firstly, for yourself, for the stress that you're under, and secondly, for that person, maybe that you have in mind now. just to say, my husband, he's a maths person. I like people. He also likes people though. But I don't do maths and people. And he said to me, I was telling him about the talk, and I was like, the highway, and and then you need to create more lanes. And he was like, that's not logical. You can't just create more lanes on a highway. I was like, it's called imagination. Use your imagination. He was like, oh, okay. So anyway, any of you thinking this, any maybe engineers or very, very logical people going, how does this highway thing work? Just use your imagination. Okay, so UPR is the first thing. Then the second one is empathy. Okay, so now empathy, interestingly, and this is something I've recently learned, empathy is not, oh, shame, hey? As South Africans, oh, shame, hectic. That's a South Africanism, hey? I find myself sometimes, and I'm so ashamed in therapy, oh, shame, man, that's so hectic. And then I'm like, empathy, Lucy, empathy, it's a cognitive skill. And interestingly, so the cognitive skill of empathy is this. Let me just show you. So what we tend to do as humans, and it's a very normal thing, is we tend to look at our relationships and look at the people that we're in relationship with through our own lens. So please excuse these. So we look at people through a tinted lens of this is how I see you. It's framed through my context. It's framed through my judgment. It's framed through, this is how I see you. And this is how I see your stress, okay? And this is the shame, hectic, okay? Okay. Then, and I used a hammer to knock the lenses out of this pair of sunglasses. Empathy, remember me in these green glasses. So empathy is, I see you. I really see you. I put aside, I suspend my lenses, and I choose to really see you. Help me understand your stress. Something I love to use is the phrase, I'm curious. I'm really curious as to what's going on for you at the moment. Help me understand. Rather than to come at it with the lens, our own lens of judgment. And when a person, so empathy fundamentally gives another person the experience of being seen, heard, and understood. And every human being, we all have the need to be seen, heard, and understood. And sorry, a scripture that I wanted to just touch on with unconditional positive regard and empathy is, if you look at that definition in 1 Corinthians 13 of love, and you look at it's patient, it's kind, it keeps no record of wrong, and it's not dishonoring, it's not easily angered, and it perseveres. And again, it's not just saying, oh, well, I'm going to just over-accommodate this person that's treating me really badly in their stressful state, but it's that I can still love without condition. I'm not saying don't have boundaries, but that's another talk all on its own. And then empathy as well, the oh, shame, hectic, we often tend to, and I'm guilty of this myself, we tend to bypass people's experience. So bypassing means we have things we say. So, oh, don't worry, it will get better. Or don't be sad, because the joy of the Lord is your strength. Yes, it is my strength, but I'm so stressed out at the moment, I'm struggling to even connect with God. So rather come alongside me and show me how to connect with God in my stressed state. So, and as I say, please, this is no judgment to anyone sitting here. I do it myself. And because we feel we've got to say or do something, so we'll maybe put a scripture on it, or we'll say, yes, but, or, yeah, but you need to look at it like this. Where sometimes I think we just have to put those glasses on without the lenses and say, help me understand. It's a nice ringtone. Okay. So now, the next thing is I've got a, these are so cool. They didn't exist when I was at school. Bendy rulers. So have you ever heard, sorry, I'm referring a lot to my husband, but it just is what it is this morning. I said to him, he's going to hear this and ask me a few questions. But I said to him, do you know, blessed are the flexible, for they will not break? He says, is that in Proverbs? You know, you're really not getting like any of my talk here, but as I mean, blessed are the flexible, for they will not break. Hey? And again, a talk for another day. I'm not talking about being overly accommodating, because we can also be rigidly flexible. Think about that. Where we can overly accommodate to our own detriment. So I'm not talking about that. But in terms of relational wellness, so just to summarize, we've got the mirror, unconditional positive regard. We've got the glasses, empathy. The third one is the need for flexibility in relationships, because stress requires that we shape shift. Because at different times in our lives, our highway is going to look different. Okay? And again, capacity is going to be different. Okay? There's going to be times where life feels like fairly plain sailing. Okay? And I can manage the daily tasks. I can have time with my children like I used to. Me and my husband can spend time together like we used to. And then I go through a very stressful period and my highway is very full, and maybe things look like this. And my capacity is just very diminished for a time. And so the ability to be flexible in relationships. So for example, I might not have the capacity to spend as much time with a friend as I used to. And we're going to get to how you effectively express your needs in relationships, which is also really important during stressful times, or anyway, but particularly during stress. And so the ability to shape shift when you are under stress is so important. And I'm not sure if any of you have come across a lady by the name of Edith Eger. She was an Auschwitz. Yes, she was an Auschwitz survivor, and she's a clinical psychologist today. She's written a book called The Choice and then The Gift. And actually in The Gift, she talks about how flexibility is freedom. And she says flexibility is freedom and strength, whereas rigidity is like a prison. And so, you know, when we are going through times of stress, we need to be flexible with ourselves first, and then flexible with the people around us in order to maintain a sense of relational wellness. And just to bear in mind that relational wellness is not relational perfection. We know that. Relationships are messy, because the minute you put people together and we're interacting, there's so many things that can go wrong. So the bendy ruler. I just want to check if I haven't. Something that I wanted to just touch on here with flexibility is the idea around love languages and understanding your love. How do you receive love and how do you give love? So maybe flexibility might look like, okay, how do I now focus on quality time, because I can't at the moment give quantity time. So I can't just, for example, my daughter being 4.5. So it is a fairly demanding life stage, although I think every stage of parenting is demanding. And if she wants to get an ice cream or whatever she wants to do, we'll do that. As opposed to whereas before, when I had more space on my highway, I could spend a lot more time with her. So that's just a practical example. Maybe you look at your life and you say, okay, how do I shape shift? How do I do the bendy ruler thing? And so knowing how those special people in your life receive love, and how do you receive love? Because sometimes we tend to think that we give love in a way that we receive love. So maybe I feel loved when I get gifts, so I give gifts. But maybe that person feels loved through a hug. So it's just important to know what their love language is. Just to again summarize, so we've got the unconditional positive regard, empathy, and then we've got flexibility, and now the fourth one is clarity. So for this one, I am going to need someone to volunteer. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can come up. What is your name?
Shannon.
Shannon, okay. So thanks, Shannon. So just so that you know what Shannon's doing, so I have got some cards here that I'm going to give to Shannon, and they've just got different color shapes on them. Okay, so Shannon, I think we can use the top of the piano. I want you to categorize these for me, please. Did you all hear she's categorizing them. I said, please categorize them for me. Shannon, thanks for trying, but that's wrong. Could you please categorize them for me? That's still wrong. Finally, thank you. Thanks, Shannon. Thank you. Thanks. Can we give her a clap? Okay, so I'm going to explain to you, Shannon, you didn't get it wrong. I'll tell you, I'll explain the analogy now. So, can you hear that I didn't give Shannon much detail at all? I was vague. Yeah. So all I said to her was, Shannon, please categorize these, which she did.
Yes.
And then I was like, you got it wrong. So then she says, she kind of looked, okay. Shannon, how did you feel when I said thanks, but it's wrong?
Felt very uncertain.
Okay, uncertain, okay. And then so first, I can't remember the order. You did them first by?
Shape.
Okay, so Shannon categorized them by shape, which was perfect because I hadn't specified. And then you categorized by? By color. Okay, and then how did you feel when I said thanks, but that's still wrong? Okay, very, very confused, all right? And then I purposely put on a bit of an irritated tone, like finally. Okay, total joke, we good. Okay, so, but this is such a lovely way of describing the effective expression of need. So do you see how I was getting irritated with Shannon, but I hadn't actually told her what I needed. So if I'd said to her, Shannon, please categorize these cards by color. Exactly. She would have done it. Done. And it's the same in relationships. So very often in relationships, and it's worse when we're stressed, because we just again have little capacity, but we can be vague. So that's an example of being vague. I was vague in my expression of need. And then it leads to feelings of irritation. You haven't met my expectations, but actually I'm playing a game I don't know the rules of. And then another way that we can express our needs is through blame. So things like, you're always busy, I'm last on your list, work just takes up all of your time. What am I actually expressing? A need for time or attention or quality time, okay? But I'm expressing it in a way that shifts blame onto the other person, and they're a lot more likely to get defensive because they feel threatened, as opposed to me saying, you know what, I would really love to spend some quality time with you. You've been really busy at work. Work has been taking up a lot of your time, and I am feeling like I haven't had enough of you lately. So it's okay to express how you feel, but do it with clarity. So clarity is kindness. To be clear to someone is actually to be kind to them. So the last way we can express our need is through complaint. So, I'm so sick and tired of cleaning up after you. You're an adult, not a child. You know, if I think of the number of times I've had a fight with my husband over the dishwasher, you know, put your dishes in the dishwasher, not around it. But I've had to learn to be much more clear in my expression of need. And so effective expression of need in relationships creates mutual context because it tells the other person, this is what I need. Then the other person has a chance to say, okay, I hear what you need. Can I meet that need? Or if I can't meet that need, how could I possibly meet it? Okay? The potential for misunderstanding is reduced. Then something here that is interesting is to understand the difference between intention and impact. So in relationships, we are always impacting one another all the time because we're interacting with each other. So we can't not impact each other for the good or in a harmful way. But when we're stressed, we often are more grumpy, we have a much lower tolerance level, those sorts of things start to happen when we're stressed. It just is that it is what it is. But we need to understand that is having impact on the people around us. And very often what happens with stress is we do turn inward because our nervous system picks up threat. It's I need to protect myself, I need to just preserve, I need to keep what's known, and relationships require us to turn outward. Okay? So intention and impact, so that's saying to your partner, for example, you know what, I don't think it was your intention to hurt me when you did that, but I need you to understand that this is the impact it's had on me. Okay? And then it gives your partner a chance to say, you know what, or whoever the person is in your relationship, whether it's your child or your boss, it gives them the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm really sorry. It wasn't my intention to make you feel less than. But I hear, you know, your empathy glasses, I hear that that's the impact it's had on you. And we always say in relational interactions that impact is impact. No one can ever say to you, no, it didn't have that impact on you. You weren't hurt by that. No, I was hurt by that. I understand your intention wasn't that, but this is impact. And so just understanding that when we are stressed, the chances of us probably impacting people around us in a way that is, I wouldn't go as far as, well, sometimes truly harmful, but in a way that is maybe our intention, they miss our intention. The risk of that is higher because our highway is just a lot more saturated. So it's just something to be aware of, okay? And when you reflect back on an interaction, maybe you think, no, hang on, I don't think that person understood my intention there. I don't think that that's had the wrong impact, but my intention's been misunderstood, and therefore the person is feeling impact from that. And go back and say, you know what, when I said that over the phone, or when I reacted to you like that, this was actually, my intention was to try and help you. But I understand the impact was that I scared you by shouting at you, for example. Okay. And then, from a biblical perspective, clarity in relationship brings peace. And exactly as Paula said, it's not just keeping peace, it's making peace. And there's the action. Because, you know, sometimes we do like to ostrich. It's because it's sometimes easier. So I'll brush it under the carpet, and I won't address this because it's going to be too difficult. The relational fallout might be too big. So I'm just going to sort of brush it aside. But there's a scripture in Romans 12, verse 18, where Paul says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And so as far as it is possible, okay, and as it depends on you. And there's times where sometimes, look, it's got to be a two-way thing. There's times where the person is not receptive to that. But I just wanted to leave you with the idea of making peace can sometimes include some conflict and difficult situations to navigate in order to get to a place of true peace, and not that kind of pseudo peace where we've kind of ostriched. Okay. Then, as we wrap up, we've got 3 minutes left, and I'm on my last point. So, the last point that I have to leave you with in terms of maintaining relational wellness during times of stress is the idea around problem solving. And so, here I've got just a little bucket. So if you imagine that this bucket is your life, this is your life bucket. It's a very similar analogy to the highway. This is your life bucket, and when we are stressed, our bucket is overflowing. Sorry, I'm going to just talk loudly for a second, but so this starts to happen. Okay, so the marbles start to fall out of the bucket, right? And often this is what feels so overwhelming, is there's just more and more marbles being put into our bucket, and there's no space, right? And eventually it just starts to overflow. So what I often encourage clients to do when we're talking through this is to firstly tip out the marbles, and I've got different color marbles and different sizes in here, and to firstly categorize them, put them into their categories. Okay, so your work stuff, home stuff, maybe your folks are ill or whatever, life stuff, your cars. Okay, and then have a look at what are the non-negotiables. So just give me a second. So as an example, the non-negotiables might be these big marbles. Okay, so maybe these are things that just have to be there. Okay, it might be work, it might be that you nursing a sick parent, it might be something that's going on with your child or parenting. Okay, that's an absolute. It's not going away for long, ever really. So these are your sort of non-negotiables in your bucket, and then you look and you say, okay, so these are the glass ones that can't be dropped, because if they smash, the consequences are going to be dire. Okay, and then you look and you say, okay, what are the ones that I still need to put in my bucket? They might not be as important, but they still need to be there, and you put those in. And then what are the ones that can actually, sorry, there you go. What are the ones that can actually be put aside for a while? What are the sort of rubber balls that actually won't break and that it's okay to put aside for a time? Or maybe you ask someone else if you could put them in their bucket for a while. And maybe you delegate and you say, it's true though, maybe you say, I need to outsource because I'm not coping. So I need to outsource some of this in order to maintain relational wellness, to make more lanes on my highway. Because that's essentially what we're doing, is we're wanting to make more lanes on our highway. So completing the stress cycle, creating more lanes on your highway. Sorting out your marbles or losing them. Most of the time I don't know where mine are, but that is creating more lanes on your highway so that the stresses are still there, but we can cope with them. So there's just the summary of 5 ways that we can maintain relational wellness during times of stress. And we are bang on 11:46. Being a teacher, you learn the bell is going to ring and you have to get through that content. So I just want to say thank you so much, and I so appreciate your time on a Saturday, and I hope that this is helpful in some way. Maybe you're going to remember, even if you just remember the mirror, the glasses, the ruler, the marbles, and what was the other one? The cards, yes, and the bucket. Okay, so thank you so much.